Hello and welcome to this edition of Just a Few. My name is Patrick Antwine. Today I'll be addressing a question on the issue of skin piercing or tattoos. The question is it wrong for Christians to tattoo their bodies? To answer this question, I'll say that there's one particular passage, and that's the only passage I've found in either the Old or the New Testament that addresses the issue of skin piercing or tattoos. And that passage is found in the book of Leviticus. So let me begin by reading that passage and then we'll take it from there. Leviticus chapter 19, I read verses 27 and 28. It says, "You shall not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure the edges of your beard." Here's verse 28 now. "You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I am the Lord." So in that verse, we see there clear instructions against tattoos and cutting your skins. And so whenever you go to the Old Testament, especially to the book of like Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, we need to be very careful that we don't rush to use those verses from those books as proof texts under the New Covenant, telling people, look, the Bible said so and so, because you need to remember, laws are never established in a vacuum. You need to understand the context in which the law was given. And it's no different with the laws in the Old Testament. Many of those laws were given in the context of Israel going into the Promised Land among pagan peoples. They were surrounded by these nations with their pagan practices, and God wanted the people of Israel to be protected from the influence of those people and their practices. So if the circumstances are not present today, we need to be very careful that we are not applying a law that was not given for our context and our circumstances. So I just wanted to say that for those people who are quick to go to Leviticus and say, look, the Bible said so and so, understand the context. So to interpret this passage, that's the first thing we want to look at, the context. It was given in the context of Israel being in the Promised Land, and among the many pagan practices that God did not want them to be influenced by, and the spiritual consequences of being influenced by that was they were forbidden to mark themselves. That's because the ancient Canaanites did that as part of, you may be familiar with things like ancestral worship, or it was also part of their worship of the many deities that is sought for prosperity and for protection. And even in our day and culture today, there are some religious systems that when there's a death in the family, you see certain members of the certain surviving members of the family are required to shave themselves in a certain way and things of that nature. You may be familiar with the days of Elijah and his conflicts with the false prophets, the prophets of Baal, and how they marked and cut themselves when Elijah told them to call upon their God, and it wasn't happening. That was part of their pagan practices, to cut themselves, to allow blood to gush, to put tattoos identifying themselves with the gods that they worshipped, and they would carve images of idols on their skin with tattoos, showing that they belonged to or they were devotees of that deity. That went against the second commandment, where God talked about don't make any images of God or any such thing. So those of you who might be thinking, well, I'm putting a Christian tattoo. Be very careful even with that. So that's the context of that verse, Leviticus 19:28. And you may say, well, I am not interested in those sort of things. When I take a tattoo, I am not doing it with the intention of honoring any deity as such. And that may be true. But even in our own legal system, you'll hear people in the police service, they'll tell you, listen, ignorance of the law is no excuse. It doesn't exempt you from the possible consequences of violating that law, and that's true. So beside the context, I want to consider certain things. Let's look at the considerations and the consequences of, or possible consequences of, tattooing yourself. And I've jotted a few things down here that I want to quickly touch on. So I've already touched on one of them, which is ignorance of possible consequences, or is not necessarily going to exempt you from those consequences. This is a case, or it might be a case, where what you don't know may very well harm you. And it may not be a case of, well, what you don't know can't harm you. It can harm you. So for some people today, getting a tattoo might simply be a fashion symbol. It might just be you want to be in vogue, you want to be like everybody else. That's for some people. You may say, I'm not joining a gang or anything like that. Good, I know that. But again, don't let your ignorance or your lack of knowledge of what is behind tattooing get you into trouble. What is important is that we should be mindful of the fact that sincerity of motives or ignorance of any possible negative consequences, whether it's a natural consequence or a spiritual consequence, even if you don't know, that does not alter possible negative outcomes. First, I want to look at, in terms of these consideration and consequences, the scientific aspect of this, because some people think, well, if just the Bible said it, we shouldn't even bother. Science is showing that nothing is wrong. Back in 2009, I came across an article on a Christian online site called creationmoments.com, where they were quoting a criminal psychiatrist and his research on people who he had studied who had tattoos. And I just want to read one paragraph from that article. And it says this. This is December 21st, 2009 edition of Creation Moments Online. Dr. William Kardassis, a Michigan criminal psychiatrist, sees a possible link between criminal behavior and tattoos. In his study of 55 patients of a maximum security hospital, Dr. Kardassis found statistical links between sociopathic behavior and the tendency to wear tattoos. He found that patients with tattoos were much more likely to have no regard for the rights of others. They behave impulsively and lie and steal with no remorse. Another study of cadavers or corpses in New York City showed that the bodies of teen drug addicts had twice the number of tattoos compared with the general population. One tattoo artist told the press that he refuses to tattoo the face, the neck, and the hands. He pointed out that some people consider tattoos in these places to be serial killer territory. Dr. Kardassis adds that simply having a tattoo doesn't mean one is a criminal. That depends on what the tattoo means to the person wearing it. So that was just the results of a study done back in 2009, that people who have tattoos all over their necks in particular and their upper body, their faces, generally that's territory for people on your body for people who have a tendency towards criminal behavior. But again, that's just one criminal psychiatrist research. Another reason I want to, another thing I want you to consider is the health risks associated with receiving a tattoo. You are trusting the professionalism and the skill of a tattoo artist, that he is so professional that he will use carefully sanitized equipment that will not contaminate your bloodstream or any such thing that would cause you to become ill, because there are possible medical effects. Because if that person is using equipment that isn't properly sanitized, and remember, you're piercing your skin, and there's sometimes the chemical in the dye can get into your bloodstream. If the chemical is not of the highest quality and it's contaminated in some way, or the equipment is contaminated, you are putting yourself at risk. When you take a tattoo, you are trusting the professionalism of that person who is doing the tattoo, that no such consequences could come upon you from doing that. So consider the health risks associated with taking a tattoo. And one last thing is the permanence of tattoos. Yes, I know that there are some people who now could remove the dye from you, but I'm told that the pain and the process of trying to remove that dye is even greater than the pain of taking the tattoo. And what you need to understand is that this is a very permanent etching you're putting on your skin. And I want you to consider, and some people, they say that, listen, you see some people, they tattoo the name or the initials of their significant other on their skin. I've heard of cases of women who have tattooed the names or the initials of their love interests on all types of parts of their body, inside of their thighs, on their, just above their belly button, or wherever. They tattoo the names or initials of this person on their bodies. What happens if that person, God forbid, should die? That person whose initials you have there, who you're in so much in love with right now, or even if the relationship goes sour and you go your separate ways, the tattoo is almost permanent. You move on now into another relationship. What do you tell that other person? Every time that person, let's say this person is now your spouse, and every time that person gets into any intimate time with you, they see that other person's name etched on the inside of your thigh. The person might be dead or whatever. What are you going to tell that person? Think about that before you take that tattoo and etching somebody else's name on it, or you may be etching some symbol on your head, or if you go to the barber, maybe somebody, it mightn't be a tattoo. You wonder, imagine seeing someone on one side of their head is being carved out by the barber, a Uzi or submachine gun, on the other side a hand grenade. You're saying something with these tattoos and these markings, and God told the nation of Israel, don't identify with certain things. And a tattoo is a permanent thing. So the permanent nature of tattoos, you need to give serious consideration to if you really want that type of marking to remain on you. And you may think your present circumstances might last permanently. It may not. It may change, and you may want to get rid of that, and it may not be possible. It may not be easy. If I may add a bit of personal thing here, I find tattoos to be unhygienic looking. I don't care how neat it looks. I find it has you looking filthy. But that's just me. That's just my personal thing. I wouldn't want anything like that on my skin. And somebody else may find it attractive and like it, but that's a personal decision. But those are some things that I just wanted you to consider here. The health risk, the permanence, the spiritual connotations involved with the tattoos. And some of you might say, I'm a Christian, I have a cross tattooed on me, or something that says about Jesus. Let me just end by saying this. Christians do not need to wear their relationship with Jesus Christ externally. Okay? So let him be tattooed on your heart. And when you have Jesus tattooed on your heart as you receive him as Lord and Savior, men will see your good works and they will glorify your Father in heaven. You don't need to do it externally to impress people that you're a disciple of Christ. The Bible doesn't ask you to do that. My name is Patrick Antoine. That's my response to that question about tattoos in just a few minutes. If you have a question and you would like me to respond to it, there's an email address there. You can send it to that email and I'll try to respond to you as soon as I can. Until then, God bless you richly.